Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I'm excited about today's guest because I have not had a guest on who has lost a twin. This is my first time, and I've got Tasha Cram with me. And before I hand the mic over to you, Tasha, I'm just going to do an intro to let people know about you and really what we're going to be talking about today. So Tasha, known in the twin community as Twinful Twin Tasha, began her twin loss journey just before she turned 4 years old. She spent 36 years of her life ignoring the need to address her complicated grief until she faced a major medical event. The experience finally forced her to confront the unhealed trauma she had suffered from losing her twin. Tasha has since spent well over a decade educating herself about complicated grief, twin dynamics, twin loss, and deepening her spiritual practices. In doing so, she gained insights into tools to aid her in turning twin loss into living twinfully. Tasha's book has both aspects of her personal journey through complicated grief as well as the complete content of her workshop. She calls this the G3 cycle: grief, growth, gratitude, which she lovingly shares for the first time with her readers. And that book came out in August, correct?
It did. Correct.
And
Yeah, August
I
22nd.
have read it, and I
Thank
think
you.
I think it is just a really beautiful book for lots of reasons that we will get into. But let's first start, Tasha, with your story, because you lost your twin, Tanya, when you were only 4 years old. So let's start there. Introduce us to your twin and how you lost your twin. Bring us back in time.
Absolutely. So Tanya was diagnosed with acute myostatic leukemia when we were 3.5. And back then, they didn't have the understanding that they have now about leukemia and treatment. I'm excited to share that it is now 90% curable for folks that are diagnosed with it, which is a beautiful thing. My mom made the uncommon choice to, one, bring my twin home on hospice when the doctor said there was no more they could do, because this was in the early 70s. So hospice wasn't what it is today. And so we were super blessed that we got to have those last few weeks with her home. And then the second choice, which was unique then, was that she was actually donated to science. And so my twin helped contribute to the knowledge we have now about leukemia and the cure for leukemia, especially in youth.
Which is to me just amazing. I mean, especially when you bring up hospice, because I did hospice work as a young social worker. And even today, there are still misconceptions about hospice, and people get into it much later. Sometimes by the time they get into it, they die within 24 to 40, to 48 hours. So I think
Correct.
that that is
Yeah.
remarkable, especially because she was a child. And I can imagine your parents that would be fearful and leave her in the hospital, but they brought her home. And that was profound for you, right? As
Absolutely.
this twin that you were with all the time, and you didn't understand what was going on.
Correct. I was blessed with a mom that had a spiritual practice and awareness and consistently communicated with us through the last few weeks that my twin was going to return to heaven soon, that we
Mm-hmm.
came from heaven, and that she would return to heaven before me, and that it was okay, that she was going to a very good and positive place and she would no longer hurt. My mom messaged that she would be able to see us from heaven even though we couldn't see her, but because we had this shared time together, we could feel her in our heart. So as a 4-year-old, my brain isn't even anywhere
Right.
near fully developed, because we know now in neuroscience it doesn't happen until we're 25. But as a 4-year-old, these are really big concepts for me to embrace. But I was blessed with a mom that planted those seeds that I ultimately hearkened back to once I was ready to actually process my grief.
which is, what's the word I want to use? Remarkable is the only word that comes up because it was so long ago. And who you are as a human, right? Because you have a deep spiritual practice. And
Yeah.
now you do. And also just the research that you have done that has been very specific to twins, because I know I was blown away as I was reading your book. And the first place I would like you to go to sort of set the groundwork for us is what you learned about twins sharing a womb, because I thought that that was fascinating. Because even though you lost your twin and you were only 4 years old, which is why I think your
Mhm.
grief was so delayed, is you didn't understand this powerful connection that really actually does happen in the brain and in the womb. So can you talk to our listeners about that?
Absolutely. So, Nancy Segal is a scientist that has been studying twins for multiple decades. So, a lot of the research that Nancy Segal led me down a path to having a deeper understanding about twins. It was a cascading effect. She really focused on living sets of twins, both identical and fraternal. However, through neuroscience and our industry, the medical industry, actually paying more attention through the gestation experience, where we now have data through the gestation experience. And even IVF has really made this a much more common conversation. What they found is that the neural pathways, because the initial neural pathways are created in utero, at the same time, there is this synchronization that happens between twins through the gestation experience. Additionally, because their bodies are made at the same time, there is a biorhythm synchronization that also happens. So once they come out of gestation, they have done enough studies now where they separate twins and they bring twins back together, and they research them through that experience, and they have found how profound this synchronization is for them, and that they are actually capable of regulating each other's biorhythms. And part of the reason why telepathic communication is so profound in twins is because of the synchronizing of their brainwaves. And so, yes, there's a lot more science behind these concepts that were, you could witness it when you watch twins and how they interact with each other, but no one understood it. So, as more and more scientists study twins, study neuroscience, study biorhythms, we have the technology to capture that data. They're actually recognizing how powerful that dynamic is. And it's just a beautiful thing. So, through that, what we've ultimately realized is even in a womb loss experience, that those vessels that were created, even though the twin didn't necessarily make it completely through gestation, through birth, because the twin that survived had a shared womb experience, their body is hardwired to regulate neuropath or regulate biorhythms and synchronize neural pathways with other twins.
It's very, very powerful. There's a million questions I have for you, that notes that I've jotted when I was reading your book, but I'm going to just catapult ahead because it feels like a segue. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about. One is going back to this grief and loss journey, that your mom had radiation treatment that what I didn't know by your book is if you guys thought that this contributed to
Absolutely.
to the leukemia, or if you know for certain that that radiation,
We know for certain.
that it caused it. And
Correct.
why I'm bringing this up is because of when you started to go on your grief journey, the guilt that you felt. Here you had, it had nothing to do with you, because I have done a lot of research and work around the guilt that people carry after
Mhm.
a loss. I was so profoundly struck by, when I started reading in your book, that you carry guilt over the loss of your twin. I thought, in my logical brain and in your logical brain, you know that I couldn't possibly have had anything to do with my twin, because we were in the womb at the same time my mother was getting radiation. Of course, your mother had, we didn't have any idea that radiation could cause that kind of harm. Talk to us about that. But start us on this journey of 36 years later. What catapulted you into you doing your grief work? And then let's talk about the guilt piece.
So When I was 40 years old, I was diagnosed with neurofibroma. What happened was I was having a lot of pain in my back and nothing was helping it, whether it was chiropractic care, exercising, yoga, whatever. It just wasn't going away. And so I went to the medical community to find out what was going on. And through the process of several months, lots of testing, lots of bouncing around, lots of questioning what it was and people telling me that they couldn't find it. We did ultimately ended up with a CT scan and they found a mass the size of a softball that was attached to my spinal column. Through that surgery experience, they literally had to open me up, remove my guts so that they could get to my spinal column, and they ultimately found 7 tumors. That was removed. Surgery was
Wow.
over. They had a hard time waking me up. They ended up taking out my intubation tube and I kept stopping breathing. So it was a pretty big event for me, and it was challenging as I did ultimately come to and learn what happened and what was going on. It was pretty traumatic, but my mom happened to be there to care for me. I'm her child and wanted to make sure I was okay. She stayed in the hospital with me for the few days that I was there before I was released, and she had a very heart-to-heart conversation with me. She knew that I had a difficult time for the first 40 years of my life and struggled, and knew I hadn't processed my grief and knew that I was making choices that didn't align with my well-being. And she said, God has given you a second chance, girlfriend. You need to figure it out. Like, you need to dive deep into this.
Wake up, right? Wake
Exactly.
up.
And she's like, this is your opportunity to get a handle on things. And so she's like, I suggest you dive deep. And so, I mean, she was a very powerful mom, and she had spent that whole time processing her grief. And so
But
she
had
had
you and your mom, had you talked about your grief over the years? Like, this couldn't have been the first time you had this conversation about the loss of your twin.
So, to clarify, for the first 10 years after my twin passed, my mom was not very involved in my life. It took her about 10 years to reintegrate as a parent. So, it wasn't until I was 14 years old before my mom was involved again. So, through that 10 years, yes, she started her process of working through her grief. But it was another 10 or 15 years before my mom even really got to the point where she could start talking about it effectively. So it wasn't until I was in my 30s. So from my 30s until my diagnosis in my 40s, absolutely, she was planting seeds. She was constantly sharing her spiritual practices and you and me, God. And she was a very, very powerful in planting the seeds and being a person of faith and trusting that those seeds would ultimately germinate and turn into something beautiful in her children. So yeah, she absolutely did. But I was kind of like, whatever, mom, eh. I didn't really absorb and put into practice what she was teaching me until I had that surgery.
Okay, but before that, let's go back to you saying that your mom wasn't really involved, because I work with parents who have lost children. It's one of my areas that I run groups specific to parental loss, and have read a lot of books on, and I did this after my brother died just to try to get some comprehension of what my parents were going through after my brother died. And this pulling away from their children is very common because of that fear. I mean, they're doing their own grief work, but also subconsciously they could lose another child if they've lost one, and there is this tremendous fear. Were you aware? I mean,
Mhm.
you were only 4, so were you really aware that your mother wasn't necessarily involved? Did your parents stay married? Like, what was happening? Did you have any other siblings? What was happening in your nuclear family? I mean, to lose a 4-year-old twin is just, I can't even imagine it. And on top of that, I don't know if your mother knew at the time that the radiation caused this. So talk to us what was going on in your awareness within your
So
family.
my biological parents had actually divorced when we were 1. So I was already in a split family with step parents. Both of my biological parents had remarried. So after my twin passed, I moved in with my biological father and my first stepmom. And I say first because he had a few other wives after that. But in that season, I was with my biological father and my first stepmom. So
And
yeah, it was a
is this
very
because your mother was just too in her grief to be able to even deal?
so my mom lost both of her parents, her father, then my twin, my nana, within a 2-year period of time. So my mom experienced tremendous grief in that season. And absolutely, it was all she could do to get up and breathe, to be a human being, let alone parenting. So as we aged and my brain continued to develop and I became an adult, we had many, many very heartfelt conversations about that season in her life, how grateful she was that we had a stepmom that loved us and was willing to step in and help care for us, and that it was a blessing because it provided her space and time to regroup and develop the skills. The grief, growth, gratitude came from my mom. She
Yes.
literally modeled that to me. And those may not have been the words, but that's what she showed me. So she had a season of deep grief. She decided she no longer wanted to have such deep grief, that she wanted to grow. And what could she learn from that experience? She ultimately found herself in a space of gratitude that she was a twin mom, grateful that the other twin was still alive, and grateful that she had an opportunity to continue to parent us. But again, that process took about 10 years.
Wow.
Once she got to that space, however, it was full steam ahead as a mom and as a productive person in society and work and all the things. And she truly blessed our family. She very much was the matriarch of our family and had a very positive influence, not only with us and our core. I have an older sister who's 3 years older than us. So not only in our core family, but my mom is the oldest of four. So she was very instrumental in her siblings and their children's lives as well. It was beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it's an incredible story of healing. And so let's talk about what you did on your own specific grief journey when you finally recognized after you had this health risk, right, where things really started to bubble to the surface, which is another, kind of going back to what this podcast is, being able to rock your shine after you've been cracked wide open. And here you were, you had this, you could have died, right? I mean, you did. You did, right? You'd stop breathing and then and so you had this awakening and this put you on this new trajectory, right? Where you're doing your research and you're really delving deeply and you write this incredible book, which really is, I mean, what I love about your book, and I said this before we started recording, my listeners know that I wrote a whole dissertation on writing through grief, loss, and trauma. And what I love so much, the way that you have designed this book on the 3 Gs, the grief, growth, and gratitude, is that you have laid it out in a way where you give some prompts, some journaling questions, and you leave the space in this book for people to journal. And it is just beautiful. And it's a cycle, as you say, because grief is a cycle. It really does change form over the years. And I love that you really talk about that in your book too. It's not linear. Almost
Right,
nothing in life is linear, right? Everything is
right,
cyclical.
right.
And so talk to us about this incredible journey that you went on.
Thank you. It was incredible. I did not have a spiritual practice before the surgery. So I took baby steps. I really started in what I would consider a relatively small way, but with consistency. I adopted a meditation practice. My mom was very much a spiritual person and talked a lot about Christ and the Christian faith, and just instilling in me connecting with my creator. And so I started with a daily spiritual practice. I started with a daily yoga practice. And then the whole reading portion, I really dove into the research practice. And it was something that I chose a time of day, every day at the exact same time, which is right when I wake up. And as I started doing the research and learning about what the tools are to recover from a traumatic experience, grief, and so on, this idea of being able to rewire my brain became a portion in my consciousness as I exposed myself to information out there, both in spiritual practices and medical research and so on. I really took about 6 years to that's all I did was I studied, I meditated, I moved my body, and I just did it every day consistently for several years. And that's what really laid the foundation. And of course, my mom was a big part of my life. So she continued to pour in. And as I came to new awarenesses, as I opened my mind to a new way of navigating, I leaned into my soul to guide me rather than the conscious understanding that I had from my brain and my life experiences, which in reality ultimately proved to be very limited once I really leaned into my spiritual practices. I realized that there was so much more beyond my own thought patterns and what I was cognitively aware of. There was a consciousness beyond that. And once I broke through those barriers and those limitations of my own life experiences and what my thoughts could teach me or show me, having that quiet time, and I talk about it in the book, to consistently give yourself, even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes, to just be still and quiet. I was inspired. I was inspired to write the book. I was inspired to bring Twinful to life. I was inspired to do the various projects. And all of that came to me through that consistency and the spiritual practices that I adopted and following how I was guided. It wasn't just about coming to the awareness. It was about getting over my self-doubt
Yeah.
and
Trust.
being willing to take the steps forward, though in the moment at times I didn't fully understand how I was being guided. I was guided to work with twins. Well, what does that mean?
It's the breadcrumbs,
I'm like,
right?
that is such a broad.
It's the breadcrumbs. It's, I talk
Yeah,
about
and
it
I'm
on the
like, what?
podcast all the time. It's following the breadcrumbs. I mean, that,
Mm-hmm.
a meditative practice is just being able to tune into our higher consciousness. And so I love this, but my readers know in the month of September, I am embracing the psychic part of me. I'm putting it out there in the world. And so I always pull cards now as I'm to ground the reading. And what I pulled for you, which is, it's just so beautiful what I pulled for you, because one was exchanging gifts. I don't know if you can see the card. It's so
Can
exquisite, and which leads to happy, happy, right? So and again, it's following the calling of our own heart. We have gifts that we are meant to bring out into the world, which leads to an overall sense of contentment and happiness. So the cards are perfect, and I only introduce them when it's meaningful in the
makes sense.
conversation. But that's exactly
Beautiful.
what you're talking about. And I have a really important question around the connecting with your twin on the other side.
Ah. That's when my whole life changed for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So during your spiritual practice, can you talk to us? Because I love talking about, the mediumship piece of when we all have the gift,
We do.
but we
We
don't
do.
know it, right? And it is
Yes.
practice, practice, practice. So talk to us when you were able to connect to your
So
twin.
I want to share again my mom and her brilliance. My mom laid the foundation that we all come from the same place.
Yeah.
All of our souls come from the same place. Doesn't matter what country we were born in, doesn't matter what language we speak. Excuse you. All this is temporary.
Right.
So
Well, we're
she
just one. We're just,
Right.
right.
We are
We're
totally
one.
one. And all the differences is of this human experience. My mom very much instilled this connection to all. And even through my twins passing, she talked about how connected we are and that our souls were created before our bodies were created. And that when she goes back to heaven, that we're going to connect at that soul level. So yes, once I started this spiritual practice, an entirely new world opened up to me. And it took about 6 months of daily practice, just consistent every single day, same time every day, being still, being quiet. And that whole higher consciousness realm opened up to me. And at the time, it was very, very overwhelming. I struggled because I wasn't expecting it. And I remember calling my mom and I go, "Oh my goodness, mama, you were right." There's this whole other realm that I hadn't even connected with yet. And I just remember her giggling and just being so proud or grateful that I was willing to follow her counsel and at least attempt to get out of my own way and allow my creator to speak to me. And by being open to that, to ultimately connect with my twin on that level, it was transformational.
Tell us.
What happened was all of a sudden I was able to hear her without my ears. And it wasn't just her. It was, you open yourself up to that realm and suddenly you're open to that realm. And again, initially I call it downloads. Our profession is technology and IT, and we do downloading.
I call it downloads too. I
Beautiful.
get
So that's
downloads when
a
I'm reading.
language.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a language that resonates with my husband, which is a beautiful thing. So I would get these downloads, and I felt that it was that higher realm instilling in me, bringing awareness to me that I wasn't yet ready for until I opened myself up to it. And I'm only given what I'm ready to receive. And so initially it was, oh, you're going to work with twins. And it's like, well, that's interesting. What does that mean? And the breadcrumbs, as you stated. And over time, I just received more and more data, more and more information. I kept getting downloads. A lot of times it would happen between that 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. time. And I would be in this, what I call twilight. I wouldn't be fully awake, but I wasn't fully asleep either. And I would get visions and messages. And then when I finally would fully wake up, I kept a journal right by my bed and I would start to write what came to me. And even in my book, I know there's an image of the Twinful logo that came to me in a vision or a dream.
Yes. And I said to you, when I first was introduced to you, I was like, I love this name Twinful. It's so creative. Logo. I just loved the logo and the wings coming out of the eye. And so when you told me that it was, an inspiration, a download, I was like, of course, it's perfect. It really is just
I love it.
beautiful. Yeah, I love it.
I do
just
love it. And I believe that the projects even that I have, we have a tie blanket project where we've distributed over 500 tie blankets into 17 different countries to twin lost twins. The journey
and
of
how about your 1,000 hugs?
The journey of 1,000 healing hugs is me traveling all over, hugging twins whose twins have passed away, as a testament to a gentleman by the name of Trevor Wager, who ultimately succumbed to suicide after his twin passed, and wanting to bring hope to our community and how powerful we are. This idea behind the science of the neural pathways and the syncing biorhythms is not common knowledge. It's not something that's instilled in the multiple community. Educating twins about how powerful they are because of their shared womb experience, and that it isn't pivoting them from, yes, so much of your life is focused on having a twin. And the interaction
being a twin, right? It's that identity, having one and being one.
Right? We don't focus a lot on being one and what it means to be one while our twin is still alive.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's how do we feel when we're with our twin? How do we feel when we're not with our twin? What's the same? What's not the same? It's a constant comparison. Yeah. So no, honestly, a lot of twins don't think a lot about what it means to be a twin. And that's what Twinful is all about. It's not just about having one, it's also about being one. And let me explain to you why you are unique, why you are powerful, why people are attracted to you and want to hang out with you and be with you. They're fascinated by you, not just because you have a twin, but because you are a twin. And the reason why you're so powerful is because you don't just regulate the biorhythms of your twin, you also regulate the biorhythms of other people. You're literally hardwired to do that. So people feel better when they're around you. And twins don't realize it. They don't understand. They think it's because they have a twin. And it's like, no, sweetheart. No. It's because you are a twin.
Perfect segue to your Lisa, right? Because you met Lisa. Yes. It was your 1,000 hugs, right? Is that how you met Lisa, if I remember that correctly? Talk to us about Lisa, because it felt like you two were also twins, right? Because you're both twins. And here you were reading each other's minds practically. I mean, talk to us about, I get chills everywhere right now. I love this conversation.
I have chills everywhere right now too. So thank you for we're having a little
A moment, right? It's
chill
because
fest
you're
right now.
a
It's awesome. It's
twin.
awesome. Okay, so let's pull back for a minute.
Okay.
Trevor, when I met Trevor through our support group, I did not meet him face to face. It was online. He was very adamant about us meeting face to face as a group, as a community, that we needed to make it a priority to interact. And in our support group, which there's over 5,000 of us, on Twin Less Twin Support Group International, they have a Facebook group and there's over 5,000 of us in the group. He said, we do a roll call and you say where you are. And it's intentional so that twins can see how many twin lost twins are in their area and they make a point to get together. Because when we're together, we experience the twin dynamic. So Trevor encouraged this. Because my twin passed when we were so young, I had it in my brain that I would not be received well in the twin community. And I was so wrong, because once a twin, always a twin is what TTSGI shares. And so I took his advice. And Lisa was the closest twin to me. Her twin had only been gone for 5 months. And so it was a really, really big deal for her to be willing to meet with me.
Absolutely. And she must have been in the throes of deep, deep grief 5 months. Because I couldn't even, I wouldn't have met you 5 months after my brother died, probably. Or maybe I would have. I don't know. But that's a raw grief at 5 months.
Well, and she still very much had her twin powers intact. She had not yet, her body was still very wired to have a living twin. She hadn't gone through the process yet of having to rewire her body, but my body had gone, I had lost a twin and went through all of the wiring of her no longer physically being here, and then rewiring my brain to understand how powerful I am as a twin was reignited when I met Lisa. It was the first time I had felt like a twin since my twin passed. And I didn't realize what that meant until I met her. And we were only together for 45 minutes in that first meeting. And by the time I left, we were clinging to each other. We didn't want to leave. We both synchronized. We ordered the same food.
I know. I know.
We ordered the
when I
same
was reading
drink.
it, I was just, I
It
know.
was insane. It was insane. And it was so powerful and transformational. Now, that was 6 years after my major surgery. So I had been doing all of this practice, spiritual practice, study science, everything about twins. I was just a sponge and absorbing all of this information. And then I step into this person's life who just lost their twin, and my twin powers get reignited, which I was totally unaware that I actually had twin powers, which is why it was so transformational for me. So I'm reignited, and she feels completely comforted and validated that her existence as a twin isn't gone. And so now all of a sudden there's this, oh my goodness, I'm going to work with twins. It was all of a sudden this awareness of this is what they don't know and they need to know. And not just in a support group situation, like the world needs to be made aware that it isn't just about having a twin, it is about being a twin, and that I am hardwired as a twin, and that didn't die when my twin lost her vessel, because guess what, friends? I still have mine.
It's amazing. Do you remember, you might be too young.
Cool.
Are you in your 40s?
I am 50.
Okay, you're 50. Okay, I'm 57 almost. Do you remember that the twin powers activate? Do you remember that? And twins
Twin
would
powers
put
unite.
yeah, and they
they would
put their
activate
fist
each other.
together. Yes, that's all I can think about as you're talking is twin powers activate, form of a waterfall. And I loved that. This is what this is reminding me of. This is such brand new information for me, and I'm sure it is for our listeners. It's very exciting. What does it mean? What does it mean? Tell us kind of your epiphanies and educating and helping these twins to understand about their twin powers. Like I want to hear more about what you're learning.
So one of the biggest breakthroughs I've had most recently is this concept of the twin life cycle. And that is actually going to be the title of my next book, which I've already started, which is so exciting. And so it's this idea that our souls united and bonded before our vessels were created. And we were blessed with our creator to say, yes, you're going to have this shared womb experience. go forth and live a beautiful human life. So our vessels are then created in the mom's womb. And the vessels, you start having your vessel is being wired as a twin with the biorhythm syncing and the brainwave communication and all of those things. And then we're born. And so now we're two souls, two bodies in the womb. When we're born, we're two souls, two bodies outside of the womb. And what we have ultimately discovered is that there will be a season for all twins, and we don't know who, but we know in all sense of twins, because less than 1% of us pass at the same time. And the less than 1% that pass at the same time are usually within gestation or right after they're born. So if
Wow.
we make it past that, there is going to be a season of two souls, one body for every set of twins. And we just don't know which body it is that we're going to get to share.
And this
So,
might be too granular, but in your research, is
mhm.
there any connection between the years between twins? And what I mean by that, like, what we know about couples who have been together really a lifetime, right? 50, 60 years, that one can pass within 6 months of the other. I've done research on siblings when you lose a sibling, that it can have a profound impact even 10 years later on your health from having a stroke and dying early. What is the connection? Did you do research on that piece of it, on the longevity of twins after one twin dies? Is there any connection? I mean, I'm just asking. I have no idea.
There are absolutely studies out there regarding that. Over the past 5 decades, 6 decades, there's been several groups. There's a group in Poland and, that have scientific groups that have done deep dives into twin dynamics, including twin loss. One of the highest rates of suicide are for surviving twins on the planet.
Hmm.
And the trauma of coming in as a dual unit, right? There's two of you from the beginning, to be able to literally, it's wrap your brain around the idea of that second vessel no longer being available to synchronize with and to interact with and to hear and touch and have that human experience. I do believe deeply in my soul why it is so important that we bring this message of the twin life cycle of the two souls, one body, that we educate living sets of twins about their soul bond primarily, because so much as twins is focused on the physicality of us. And we aren't talking in our community or in the world about the initiation of the soul bond. And if we can bring that awareness to the twin community before their twin passes, they can practice this spiritual connection, so that then when their twin passes, they can lean into the notion that my bond started eternally at a spiritual level and is not contingent on this other vessel still being here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge, huge for the twin population. So it is very rare that we die at the same time. Once you get past the first couple to 5 years, if a twin can make it past the 5 years, then they will typically have a decent lifetime beyond that. It's within the first 2 to 5 years that if they don't get the support they need and they aren't able to rewire their brain and they can't connect into this notion of actually being able to live with their twin no longer here, that they will either pass of natural causes or ultimately through suicide. So it's very vital that we provide immense support through the beginning stages of grief, the new lost twins, that we come alongside them very, very quickly, that they get around other twin lost twins as quickly as possible, because they will experience the twin dynamic and they will feel it, that they have not lost their twin power within their vessel. But you have to be physically next to another twin in order to come to that awareness. And so it's vital. It's vital that we do that. So my mission is to educate the planet about everything that I just shared with you.
Yeah.
And to save as many surviving twins as possible, to let them know that, yes, you can continue to live your life all the way to a natural passing. And it doesn't, because your twin has passed, does not preclude you to a short lifetime.
I mean, I love what you're saying because I think about how parents don't want to be here anymore when their children die, and how just I felt the darkness I felt. I never felt suicidal, but it's that you're okay if a truck runs you over, right? I sort of think about when you're talking twin loss is those feelings on steroids where the other half, you literally feel like the other half of you is dead, has died. And it does not surprise me you're giving me the stats on suicide. And because I tell you, it struck me pretty hard when I read about Trevor. That's his name. Is it Trevor?
Trevor
That
Wager,
Trevor
yeah.
that Trevor took his life. And of course, he is out here doing this advocacy work because he was also desperate himself for some hope. Were you aware that he was struggling? I don't know how close you were with this man, Trevor. So was it a shock to the whole?
Absolutely. And not only a shock to me, but a shock to our entire
That's
community.
what I
And
mean, to the community. Was it just
yes,
a
yes,
shocking?
it was massive because he was so active in the group. He was so adamant about us meeting people. Like he was a huge champion for our community and a gift and a blessing. And I'm so grateful I have, because he private messaged me. So I have these messages from him, and his history is still in the Facebook group. So we can look him up and see his encouragement to the community. It rocked our world in a mighty way. And that's what brought the journey of 1,000 healing hugs. I grieved for about 3 days, just shocked, very overwhelmed. And then I was like, we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough. So I did this post, didn't even think about it, didn't think about the consequences, didn't think about how long it would take, didn't even think is it even possible? Am I even going to be able to meet 1,000 twins? Who knows? I didn't think about any of that. I just did a post in the support group and said, I'm going to hug 1,000 twins. So, I'm going to start. I was already traveling. My business, we travel a lot around the country. So I was already traveling, and I just said, I'm coming for you. I'm going to meet you and I'm going to hug you.
So what
And
happened? How did you? Oh, I still want to go back to Trevor. I don't want to leap ahead because here I am feeling like he's out there doing this advocacy work. He takes his life and the profound impact that had to have on surviving twins. Like, are you kidding me? You're telling me that my life can go on, and you're like, it is not lost on me just how profound this must have hit people who followed him and listened to him and were inspired by him and got hope from him and all of these things. And now this person takes his life. How long had it been since his twin died? How much time?
years.
4 years. Interesting. I just think of the people who were
Mhm.
getting hope from him and what that must have felt like.
Mhm.
And
So
so
I will tell you there's an accountability for me because I am not free of that burden of wishing I was with my twin in
right.
heaven.
Well, I was going to go there next, asking you, had you
Mhm.
ever had suicidal thoughts, and not really understand what that was about before you had these awakenings?
Oh, my heavens, absolutely. Oh my goodness, yes. And I think that's the biggest profound piece with the health situation is up to then, I was literally waiting to die. I mean, I had a life, I had children, I'd been married, I've worked and so on, but my thought pattern was, when am I going to finally get to be reunited with my twin? I mean, this is crazy. I remember it wasn't until I was 10 that I realized she was never coming back. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s, which again perfectly aligns with neuroscience and what they've learned about brain development and cognitive reasoning, and how our cognitive reasoning isn't fully developed until we're 25. And so it wasn't until my early 20s when I was like, holy smokes, you mean I'm going to actually have to live an entire lifetime? I should have been gone by now. Why am I still here? So I spent a bunch of time frustrated with the fact that I was still alive. And
But
I was actually,
you also had two losses. I mean, you moved out of being with your mother. That also had to have been huge at the time. You're 4. You've lost your twin. You're moving to a new house, and or in with your. I
it
mean,
was
it's not like
absolute
it was a
chaos.
stranger, right? It was
It was
chaos, though, right?
absolute
And
chaos.
and everyone's grieving, and here you are, this little 4-year-old, kind of lost in the mix. I mean, I volunteered for years at the Center for Grieving Children. We start kids in grief groups at 3 years old.
There
If
was
you're
nothing.
old, right? Exactly. There was
Mm,
definitely nothing then. You
nothing.
know, And still today there's this misnomer with kids. If you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. But kids grieve so differently. We think, oh, they're going to be fine. Kids are resilient. I mean, they are. But I think about 0 to 5, what gets stamped on our subconscious brain, that follows you through your life.
Oh,
So
and then I had the message that I would always feel broken. I would always feel like she was missing or lost, or from that side of the family, they didn't have the spiritual awareness that my mom had. It was not instilled that I was connected with my twin prior to her being born, and that foundation of a spiritual practice. It was, you're always going to feel broken, you're always going to feel lost, you're always going to grieve. This is going to be a problem for you.
so
That was
you had
essentially what was instilled in me in that first 10 years.
So
So,
were you a depressed child, like in your high school years? Were you talk to us how that loss impacted those formative years in your life?
and this is, again, thank you for asking. It's very common with twins. We ultimately become the overachiever. We ultimately become a perfectionist. I must live for both of us. There's this message of, I have to make up for the fact that she's
Yeah,
gone. This gap that's there, that I've been told there's always going to be a gap. I need to figure out how to fill it. I have to fill this gap. And so a lot of twins, and this is also why I believe that they're, as far as longevity of their life, they will put so much energy into this notion of living for both of us. We run ourselves ragged. And so I went into overachiever mode. It was, on the dean's list, and ran for Miss Shasta County. I was in a beauty pageants and all the talent stuff. And I just I ran myself ragged for many, many, many years, and still at times struggle with it. I mean, it's very much in my brain. So there are other twins that do the very deep depression and can't function. And it's very polar. It's one or the other. It's, I can't live, I can't function, I can't even breathe. They feel like they can't even breathe. And then there's the other ones that just drive really, really hard. And it's like, I must, figure this out. I must make up for, I must live for both. I must be a testament to my twin. I must honor them. I must, and it's not balanced.
right. And what about drug
True.
and alcohol addiction?
Very common. Yes, of course. Absolutely. Very, very common in the twin community.
So now let's go venture into, if you can believe it, it's already the top of the hour, which I cannot believe. But let's go ahead and talk about the guilt that you started to feel when you learned about, I don't know how old you were. I can't remember when you actually learned that the radiation caused the leukemia in your sister, and then you had to grapple with the guilt. Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
So it was very common through my upbringing. The whole story about my twins passing, it was a story that was told regularly. This was not a secret that was kept, which is unusual in some cases. There's lots of families that won't even talk about the twin, especially in a young loss. So I by the time I was 10 years old, I had this understanding of what happened. And as I explained in my book, as my cognitive reasoning developed, the more my brain developed, the more I understood science and what actually happened that caused my mom to have x-rays, which was, I broke her rib, and they know it was me because I was the baby down that kicked. She was kicked. And so, yes, my brain decided to give myself credit for causing the need for the x-rays. And because my twin was the one on top, she was my shield. And had I not kicked my mom wouldn't have had the x-rays. My twin wouldn't have been sick. She wouldn't have died. And that's where my cognitive reasoning went based on the story. And logically, scientifically, yes, those are the facts. That's what happened. However, the reality is, like you spoke about in the beginning, which I ultimately came to once I got sick and started my spiritual practice, there's a much, much bigger picture for Tasha Joan. Full twin Tasha would not exist if I hadn't had that experience with my twin. And this notion that my twin fulfilled her purpose in hardwiring my body so that I could function like a twin
And do this
and
twin work.
to ultimately do the twin work. And not all twins who have their twins all the way into their adulthood, they don't have 40 years of practicing being a twin lost twin. They don't have 40 years of opportunity to practice their grief and, gain the tools and you know what I mean? And so because of the age that she passed, I was afforded an opportunity to go through this transformational experience and come to the table with wisdom because I proactively researched. I didn't just do the spiritual thing. I also did the science thing. And I was willing to dive deep because I wanted to give meaning to this, what had been a very horrific and challenging experience my entire life. And when my mom was like, girlfriend, you're still here. You better figure this out. You have a purpose. That's when the guilt of surviving finally started to wane.
And it came, and
I
you
was
came to gratitude, right? And this is your
I finally
cycle.
made it to gratitude because I was willing to dive in deep and grow and
Yes.
go, I get to decide. I'm here. I get to decide. Am I going to focus on the fact that she's gone? Or that she no longer has her vessel because she's not gone? Am I going to focus on the fact that she no longer has her vessel? Or am I going to focus on the fact that we have a spiritual bond? Am I going to focus on the fact that I don't get to talk to her? Or am I going to focus on the fact that I get to talk to her? Right? Like it's a different consciousness. It's a different awareness. And then once I got really good at that, now how do I educate the world?
Yeah.
How do I educate the world? I write a book. That's what I do. I write a book.
Can you
and
show us? We're gonna have all the links in the show notes, but can you show us your book? I love it. It's so beautiful. And then within the book, if you want to just go there, you can show them that if you want to just like go in the middle of the book, that it's set up. There's narrative and then there's journaling, and you really break the book up into sections around, so you can see all of those journaling pages. So she'll get to the part on grief and she gives you some prompts, and then she has more narrative, and then she goes into growth, etc. So I really do love the way that you have that you constructed that book.
Thank you.
Because I think it really holds our hand. And I don't even think it's just for twins. I think anybody grieving, that this book it's a beautiful book, because a lot of the things that you're talking about twins, and that's why I say it sounds like on steroids, because a lot of the things that you are talking about, even, anybody in a spiritual practice that understands that we can connect to a higher realm, that we're souls in this human body. So we all have, but it's practicing. You've got to be, you can't connect to your higher self if you don't make space, and it takes practice like anything else. Lots of times people sit there and they're like, nothing's happening. Well, nothing might happen for a while. You got to stay at it. I always end with 2 questions, but before I do, I want to ask you, is there anything else that you want to make sure you talk to listeners about that I have not asked you about before I go into my final 2 questions with you?
I think just we've already talked about the book. And I think the biggest thing is letting your listeners know that you have the power to make a conscious choice. You don't have to let your brain run wild. When you lean into the power of your soul, you can actually quiet your mind, because your mind is of this human experience, but your soul is eternal. And it comes from a place of power that surpasses all understanding. And we learn about this in the scriptures. And how you tap into that is giving yourself permission to acknowledge that there's a consciousness that's beyond this life experience. It's beyond what you learned in school, your memories from this lifetime. It's beyond the limitations of your mind, of your brain. When we talk about body, mind, and soul, me, myself, and I. Me is my body. Myself is my self-awareness. It's my mind. It's my self-awareness, my memory. And the I portion of me, is that soul portion, just like Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, right? It's the spiritual side of me. It's me, myself, and I. And when I no longer had myself running me ragged, I listened to my I am, the I am that God gave
The
me
I
when He
am, that's what,
created.
yes.
Yeah, it's my I am, though. It's the I am that God gave me when He created my soul. And that is such a powerful gift and awareness that when we allow ourselves to lean into our soul, suddenly we have a consciousness that we hadn't yet tapped into. And it opens up a whole new world to
Yeah,
you.
call it our compass, our true north. I think
Mhm.
that I love to call it wasting a lot of time, where we step outside where we're really meant to resonate, and our integrity, our true alignment, our true north, our soul, whatever. People have tons of different language for it, but it is our truest inner guidance of being part of all it is. And so
Mhm.
I want to thank you so much for coming on, but I'm not going to let you go till you answer these two last questions.
Okay.
First question is, what does self-love mean to you?
Self-love is giving myself permission to acknowledge the gift of my life that God has given me.
Beautiful. And finish the sentence for me. Hope is.
Recognizing that I do have a purpose and that we all do. And by me being willing to do what we're doing right now, that we can bring hope to those who feel they don't have it, and ultimately tie into that deep internal spiritual understanding of self, which will guide you to a beautiful existence. That it's true, that the hope is knowing that that's possible for all souls.
I always say when I pull my cards, they always have a meaning. There you go. We are all born with our gifts. And this is, I don't know if you can see this, but it's exchanging gifts, which leads to our ultimate happiness in this world. And so I feel like every time I pull cards for the collective, that I'm always telling my listeners the same thing, that we are here to bloom in our beauty, that we are here, we have these magnificent gifts to share with this world, and to believe in it and to go after it. And that is what leads to our contentment, our peace. And I feel like I say the same thing no matter what cards I'm pulling. So apparently this message is really trying to get through to the collective, because we have to. It's time for us to wake up to the truth
Mhm.
of who we are. And that is that we are love. We are love. And
Mhm.
I just want to thank you for this incredible interview, and what you are doing in the world,
Thank you.
rocking your shine, and
Yes.
bringing and bringing your gifts to this world. And
Thank
it's,
you.
I can already feel that it's having a tremendous impact on the people that you have, not just the people that you have already touched, but the millions of people you're going to touch. That's what this
Mm.
feels like.
A ripple.
Um,
Mhm.
so
It's a ripple.
I
Yeah.
want to thank you. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on. This is so
Thank you for
great.
inviting me, and thank you for sharing time and space with me. It is such a gift. I feel very blessed. Thank you.
Same. And I want to thank my listeners always for tuning in, spending some time here in this space. My, my deepest prayer is that whoever listening, that you take something from this that you need to hear. And I love you guys, and I'll see you here all next week. Bye for now.